life is not linear. It's a lot of different pieces and that overlap, I find, for myself. And so while I was working on the tree project, I also got the opportunity to produce this book, South of Market. And I was excited to do it and a little overwhelmed because everything was 4x5 negatives and I had to scan everything. And I had never done that. I hadn't got them scanned. I wasn't sure what the edit was. I was finding work I had never printed before in my files, in my ammo can where I kept all my negatives. And so it was exciting, but it was also a really big challenge. And I think I had to scan some things, multiple times as I got better and better quality scanning and understood it. But I did it pretty much myself. And so that was a learning curve. But I made all these scans and I came to Brad again and I said, all right, we need to start making prints for the book. And that was about 3 weeks, I think we spent in this studio in West Oakland. Mm-hmm. I forgot what street it was, but I do remember the winter and quite chilly.
Yes, it was cold.
Maybe you want to speak to this process, Brad?
Yeah, so those are, if I remember, they're 8x10 or 11x14.
8x10.
8x10 work prints. And so when we got to a place where we felt like the files were looking good, and we had maybe made a few test prints of them, and maybe we thought they were pretty much finalized, then I think we printed them all out. And those are not push pins, but they're push pin magnets. That wall's got a metal plate on it, and Janet turned me on to these magnets a long time ago, and they're totally awesome. And so we magneted all these up, and then it let us see them as a unified group and be like, okay, what ones are starting to fall out for being too light or too dark or too contrasty? And that helped us kind of flag the ones that needed to be revisited.
Yeah, it was difficult in the sense that some of the negatives were a little underexposed. And so those were probably the most challenging ones. And you're always trying to breathe life into that favorite image that you had to let go of in the darkroom because you just couldn't salvage it. And you're thinking digital is going to make it work. And, there were a few of them that we were able to deal with in that way. But I think that's a really good point that you remind me now, is that we were trying to make it have a feeling of a whole, and that the pictures would all sort of read in a similar vein. This image is, the color isn't great of the actual pictures, so the pictures look better than this in real life. But this was one step towards getting the final.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of images. In fact, we had 1.5 inches worth. I love this picture. Because I was actually looking for the box of prints and I was going to photograph it, then I couldn't find it right away.
I think there was 115 or 120 of them.
Right.
You were.
And ultimately, the book had 80 pictures in it, but in the editing process and in the printing process, we made an effort to get as many in as we could. Yeah. And then this image is in my studio, and it's showing kind of a very funky C print there at the top and a much improved archival pigment print below it.
Oh, interesting.
And then there's the question of fading, which I think the photograph at the top was also fading. And obviously the lighting in this picture is not really giving these images their best show, but it is a huge difference sometimes between what the C prints look like originally, what they look like once they faded, and how I was able to reproduce them in with the printers, inkjet printers.
And you feel when working with Brad that you feel like you've got a connection between the what you visualized and your feeling for the film, and then what ends up on the wall.
Yeah, I think we were both learning together at the beginning about this idea. I don't know if you had been working with photographers who used film in Sebastopol, or if they had mostly already changed to digital.
I think when I started there, 90% of them shot film, but 80% of that was transparency film. So,
Very good.
because scanning negs was something that we did, but at that point in time, that was 2005 or six. Like people were still doing the norm was to do optical prints from color negatives and not so much scanning them. That was kind of like starting to come into vogue around that time. But it's certainly a lot more involved to scan a color negative and try to match it to a C print than it is to scan a transparency and make a print.
Yeah. Right. So, but so these were prints that I made from those same files that we did for the book, and I was able to produce them in my dark room and well, my studio, my digital room. And then here's just a few of those photographs from that series. All this whole book, because it sold out, I've posted all these photographs on my website, so you can see more of the work there. This was this was a really tricky one, and one that really benefited from the digital process because she was not nearly as visible. And this is with a view camera, and so I was able to really work on how she came out. And also in this particular one, I showed both of these because the enter at your own risk and looking in the print, I never was able to find that person in the background there, as I was thankfully able to with the digital scanning that I could do. Right. And this is just to sort of name the project of, looking at the Moscone Center and its implications on the larger surrounding neighborhood.
Janet, do you have the flag makers in this?
I didn't put it in, no, but we could. Yeah, that was a tricky one. That was one that was underexposed.
Yeah.
And this one had a multiple iterations. It seemed so straightforward, but it was elusive. There's a lot of refraction of the light, so there's a softness that happens from the fog and the moisture in the air, and then when it isn't there, the clarity is spectacular. And I remember when I showed these South of Market photographs in New York City, under the hazy summer weather or the winter, they were always like, the light in California, it's so phenomenal. This would be back in the 80s where you could define things more carefully. But at any rate, there, I think, is the last picture. I'm a very firm believer that it is very difficult to print by yourself. That having another set of eyes to look at something is really important. So whenever I'm making finished prints, I always either am working in someone else's studio with them, or I'm inviting somebody into my studio, and we're using my equipment, so it's all in sync with my own system, and making those final prints and final adjustments. And Brad used to come, but now he's gotten too big for me.
Oh, that's not true.
Well, it would be tedious, I'm sure. I mean, you know your system, and I know mine now, so there is a lot to that. It's very hard to shift.
Yeah. Well, when the pandemic's over and we can visit again.
Yes.
I'll come over and we can hang out, and you should come up and visit me because it's been a couple years too.
It has been. Yeah. I mean, there are other people who work really closely with you. So, and in ways that I haven't had the chance to do. I don't have a lot of production. Some people are like having a lot more stuff happen than I'm right now.
Yeah. But I think you totally hit it on the head where at a certain point, especially with your background, like you really need to be able to make some or all the prints yourself. And like a way, like you mentioned earlier, like you started with like the little Epson desktop before getting your 7800 or 7900 or whatever you're onto now.
79.
Yeah. But, even being able to make small prints and bring them to your printer to show them like what you're looking for, or like, hey, I've discovered this, direction, and can we kind of go that way? Like that's super helpful. And, it's a really important part of the process. And also being able to just move your prints around at home, like on the wall, like we did, or on your table, you can see patterns that you just wouldn't normally see on the screen.
Yeah, relationships of color and density and light. And now I'm reminded that I did make 8x10 prints of everything. Well, Vince, I'm very excited for this project, and I'm glad to be part of it. And thank you for the invitation. And I look forward to seeing the other people's presentations as well.